Alrighty, welcome everybody. Thank you for coming to the program. This is an alumni career chat focused on sustainability. My name is Doddanari Meyer, and I'm one of the assistant directors on the counseling team at the Career Center and the career counselor specifically for students at the College of Environmental Design. Although, of course, sustainability covers such a broad area, I imagine some of you are from different majors. What I'd like you to do, if you could, to start, is put in the chat what your major is so that we can have an understanding, just a feeling for who we have in the room. You can just type it in the chat and share it with everybody. It will be helpful for us all to know. Thank you. Great, so we got SED, Society Environment. Okay, great. A lot of combinations, awesome. So what we're going to be doing today is meeting with two alumni at different stages in their careers and in different aspects of sustainability. So I'm hoping that you'll get a nice sense of different possibilities within the field. And of course, again, it just represents a couple of people's experience. To begin with, I'd like to thank the student groups that have helped me market this program, and they include SED Inc. or SEED, which is, it's coming up with a new name as we speak. And we also have the CED Undergraduate Student Council, AIAS, the Berkeley chapter, and CASA. And so welcome everybody from those groups. And I'd like to invite you also, anybody from those groups, if you'd like to put in the chat any information you'd like to share about your groups for students who may be interested in learning more about you and in potentially joining your organization. So thank you very much. And great, so we already have something from Daisy. So to begin with, getting into our main focus, what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask a couple of questions of our two speakers, and I'll have them introduce themselves. I'll ask them a couple of questions, maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then I'll open up the floor for you guys to ask any questions that you might have. And I have some questions in my back pocket in case you run out of questions that you'd like to ask. And at the end, or at some point, what I'm going to do is put a link to a Google form for a survey in the chat. And if you need to leave early, I'd really appreciate it if you could fill that out. And if you stay till the end, I would also appreciate it if you fill it out so that I can get some helpful feedback from me on this program and some input that will help me with future programs. Okay, so without further ado, let me start by asking each of our speakers to introduce themselves just by name, current organization, and role that you have right now. Just a very quick introduction. And I'll start with Mara. So if you could start, that would be great. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mara Baum. I work for an architecture and engineering and, well, integrated design is the catch term, integrated design firm that includes architecture, engineering, city planning, urban design, landscape architecture, et cetera, in San Francisco called DIALOG. And I just joined in the last couple of months. I'm a new partner with the firm, which means that I'm actually one of the 50-something owners of this 600-person firm. I am an owner, or excuse me, I'm a partner in the architecture and sustainability realms within that practice.
Great, thank you very much, Mara. And Ankitha, please introduce yourself.
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Ankitha. Currently working at Southern California Edison. That's the main electricity provider here in Southern California. And my role right now is a resource planning and environmental strategy analyst. It's kind of a very long-term, but basically what it means is on our clean energy policy and any data analysis work.
Thank you, Ankitha. I've been speaking with you for a while and I have never pronounced your name right, and I apologize.
No worries.
So welcome to both of you. And the first question I'd like to ask is, could you please describe the nature of your current work, the tell me more about your organization and your role and responsibilities. Just get into a little bit more detail about what you do. And Ankitha, you can go ahead and start, please.
Sure. So my current role, I'm an entry level associate specialist. So my work is mainly divided into two domains in terms of how we think about climate change. The first thing is climate change mitigation. So a lot of what I do in that area is more focused on our pathways for reaching net zero carbon by 2045. So there are a lot of different planning efforts ongoing relating to that. You might have heard of Southern California Edison's strategy that was released a couple years ago to align with the state goals on reaching net zero. So currently we're working on some updates to that. That's been a big part of my work. A lot of the times the smaller things that come out of that are different projects, different things to research, like different technologies relating to clean energy. For example, I'm working on biomass conversion, looking into the different ways biomass can help us meet our clean energy goals. And on the other side of things, I'm also working on climate adaptation. So the state has charged us to look into how to adapt our electricity assets to a changing climate. So that has involved a lot of new work, a lot of research about the different impacts that climate change can have on our region. And I've especially enjoyed working in that space in terms of how to integrate equity into all of the solutions that we're planning, how to integrate sustainable alternatives to kind of traditional hard infrastructure solutions. Yeah, I think that's the main overview of my work.
Thank you, Ankitha. That's very helpful. So Mara, can you tell us about your role more fully?
Sure. So I love that I'm here with Ankitha, that we're at kind of opposite ends of the spectrum, public and private. So I work for a consulting firm. We're hired by owners to design buildings and cities and spaces. And so my role is as an architect, working on building design, but also very much heavily focused on the sustainability side of that. So I have had a pretty big part of my career in which I've been in a role called like sustainable design leader or sustainable design specialist, something more along those lines, along with architect. And in that capacity, I very much do a lot of the same kinds of ideas that Ankitha talked about, but in the context of what does that mean when you build a new building or renovate an existing building or create a new space within a city or community, trying to create a much more sustainable environment. And in these days, there is, of course, a huge amount of focus around human health, and that has been a big focus of mine personally for a long time as well. But also climate change and adaptation. How do we create buildings that truly will be able to be with us for 50 years, 100 years or more, and not just completely get railed by whatever might be coming our way?
Okay, thank you very much. So that was one of my goals, or one of the things that I thought would be great would be to have you at different ends of the spectrum and different kinds of arenas, and just to sort of see what you have in common and what's different. So it's interesting to hear from you how you perceive it as well. So the next part, this is maybe a little longer. I'd like you to talk about your career path, starting with undergraduate up till now, and any highlights that you'd want to mention along the way. So, I mean, obviously you could talk for a long time about every little thing, but if you could speak to those, kind of pivotal, important moments in your career where you made decisions or you moved in a new direction or whatever it may be, that would be really great. So Mara, you can continue if you'd like.
Okay, well, I studied architecture as an undergraduate, kind of a 4-year program, pretty similar to Berkeley's. I was at Washington University in St. Louis, but at that time, which is now a while ago, right? At that time, there was no talk of sustainability and people thought that was crazy. And I was pretty much prepared to leave architecture because I didn't feel like it was really that meaningful and not a place that I cared to be in. But I went through with it. I graduated, I got a job with an architecture firm, and I got really lucky because I ended up with a mentor who was very committed to this. And I learned a ton working with him. And it was through that work that I decided to go back to graduate school at Cal. So I went for architecture and city planning, a dual degree program. I've mostly been an architect. I do some work related to planning, but I'm kind of like big architecture, little city planning in terms of my ongoing work. But I ended up at Berkeley because at that time, there weren't a whole lot of schools where I felt like I could engage with professors where they would know more than I did, having been in practice for a while. That's not true anymore, right? Now, the tables have turned quite a bit, and a lot of people in school have you guys presumably, at least a little bit, have the opportunity to study some of those things that I didn't. And after grad school, I really had to carve a different kind of path for myself. Because I knew I wanted to work full-time in sustainability and wasn't really sure what that would look like as an architect. But I did. I kind of created that path, and now there's a whole I and many others at the same time. Now there really is a whole kind of career direction that people can take, whether they come from architecture or other related environmental design backgrounds, can go in and work as a kind of a sustainability focused person in a professional services firm like architecture and engineering. And so I very much, since then have followed that path. Before DIALOG, I was with HOK, a large architecture firm in San Francisco. And in that, I did a lot of, at that time, I was doing a lot of work on hospital design and healthcare, and have continued to do that a little bit as well now, but I'm also branching out and working in a lot of other project types as well. I hope that was succinct enough. That's such a hard question.
Yeah, I know. It's like, here's my whole life in a couple of minutes, right? No, and I think you give enough information for people to maybe latch on to different aspects and ask questions about different parts of it. So Ankitha, if you can share more about your career path, that would be great.
Sure. Yeah. So I did the BA for Sustainable Environmental Design at Berkeley. My first real job relating to anything about sustainability was with our Transportation Sustainability Research Center at Berkeley. It's in the David Brower Center. It's a really lovely building if you guys are into architecture. When I was working there, I was doing a lot of data analysis calculations about electric vehicle efficiency and electric vehicle planning. So that was really my first time doing any sort of sustainability or data analysis work at all. And I kind of really learned on the job, and I really liked it, and it's kind of one of the things that set me on to work at SCE later. But I did explore a lot of different career paths relating to what we as SED majors learn about. So I did also look into kind of the more built environment, architecture, sustainability. I interned with Urban Fabric, which is a sustainability consulting firm in San Francisco, and I believe they're no longer in business. Yeah. I feel like I might have met you, Mara, before.
I wondered.
And I learned a lot about, green building certifications and all the different things that relate to architecture and sustainability. But I really wanted to, if I was working in green building and sustainability, I wanted to be working on more of the architecture side, which unfortunately I am not much of a designer or a drawer. So I figured I'd switch more over to the planning side of things. So I also interned at the city of Oakland in their bicycle and pedestrian program. where we did focus a lot about, you know, smart or safe streets design, sustainability in that way. So that's something I really enjoyed, and I kind of directed my focus more to the planning side of things, city planning, or, you know, different types of planning relating to sustainability. And I found that I really felt like things relating to climate change were really meaningful to me. So that's really how I ended up working where I am now.
Thank you. I think it's interesting to hear about how you recognize what your strengths and interests are and figure out how to pivot and where you can fit. So it's a good thing for people to keep in mind of, you know, what are your strengths? Where can you go? If an area isn't necessarily your biggest strength, it doesn't mean you have to abandon it altogether. Maybe it's just coming from a different vantage point. So I think that's helpful. I want to give you guys a chance to ask any questions before I jump into any other ones, because you know, you may have some burning questions already. And if you have a question, you can either put it in the chat, or you can just go ahead and unmute yourself and ask either person a question, or both. So does anybody have any questions you'd like to ask?
I have a question. First of all, thank you for being here. And then I was just curious, where do you find yourself? Like, where do you think you are in your career journey? Like, are you kind of comfortable with where you are now? Are you pursuing other options right now, or do you have any like big goals in like, yeah, the broad field of sustainability?
Thanks, Daisy.
Well, I'll go first because that's a hard question for me. Like I said, I just changed jobs because I obviously was looking for something more. In my case, I'm pretty far along in my career. I am not that far along in the context of I'm not going to like retire, but I've been working in the industry for, maybe not quite 20 years. I graduated Berkeley in 2005, and I worked a couple years in between. So in my case, I've been really focused in what I do around sustainability. And that has allowed me to advance in my career at probably a faster pace than someone who was a broader generalist in architecture, and has given me kind of a platform to really talk about my work and my interests in a way that has helped to elevate me in my work. And so I've been very lucky to have gone through, I worked very hard for it, but also very lucky to have hit the right moment in time for that. And was able to move up, so to speak, pretty quickly compared to many of my colleagues. So I was a principal at in my last job, and I'm a partner now, which isn't super young. I'm in my early 40s, so not super young, but kind of young compared to a lot of other people. But at the same time, I felt previously like I was working in a huge architecture firm where I was still, even though I had been doing really well for myself, I personally still felt a little bit like a small cog in a big wheel. And not that I moved to a firm that's really small, although the San Francisco studio is smaller. It is a much smaller environment than my last one had been, and it feels like it's easier for me to really drive the direction of what we're doing and do that in a way that puts sustainability at the forefront of our work.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. Ankitha, did you want to answer that as well?
Sure. Yeah. So in terms of where I am in my career, I'm still very early. This is my first job post-graduation, and I've been working here for about 9 to 10 months now. So I don't see any, changes on the horizon for me, kind of in the near future. But definitely, I researched a lot of different career paths before taking this role. I was really considering something in city government or state government. So that's definitely something I could still see for myself in the future. There's a lot of important work going on at the state level, especially. So I could see myself eventually in Sacramento or somewhere in DC, but I've also not really explored the consulting side of things too much. So that's also something I've just had in the back of my mind. Something I used to do in college was keep just kind of a running list of firms and agencies that seemed interesting and doing important work to me. So that's kind of something that I've kept going just in the back of my mind to inform, future career decisions. Always a good idea to have that list that you can refer back to and see how you relate to it as you go through your career. Does anybody else have any questions that you are really wanting to ask Ankitha or Mara?
I do, if you guys hear me.
Yes.
So hi guys, thank you so much for talking with us. Like I've honestly learned a lot. Personally, I'm somebody who's not from the College of Environmental Design. I'm a society and environment major, I think, as like a lot of people here are. So I was wondering if you guys have like any very general advice for looking for internships or like maybe first jobs out of college, like just generally in sustainability and not necessarily in design or architecture.
So I'm going to say that the world has evolved sufficiently since I was in your shoes. I'm probably not going to give the best advice on that.
I can go ahead and take that question then. It wasn't long ago that I was looking for internships and first jobs. First of all, I'd say just make a note of anyone in the field who you've come across, either at these events that the Career Center has, or maybe even just on LinkedIn, or companies that you find interesting and you've noticed different people working at, and reach out to them to learn more about what they're doing for an informational interview. And then you can really get a feel for whether you can see yourself, maybe interning or working there, but also you can get leads to different opportunities that they may know about. So that's definitely one thing. And I know a lot of people say, just network, don't apply online or anything, but almost every job that I've gotten, I've just applied online and not actually networked for. So definitely don't neglect that part of things. I did a lot of research on, different job sites, just like even Google Jobs. Once you put in a location and a keyword, you can get a whole bunch of different listings that pop up. So definitely not neglecting those. And when you're applying, I would say really focus on making your resume the best it can be, and the cover letter. The Career Center has great resources for that. I know I use that a lot in my time looking for a job. So just kind of getting other people to look over your application materials and make sure that it's what the companies will be looking for.
And tailored to whatever job you're applying for. Your resume might look a little bit different for every single organization.
Yeah, points well taken. Networking is important. Using listings is important. Doing a combination kind of creates a good synergy. Always tailor your materials. You can start with, having everything down on your resume and then tailoring it according to the position. I want to ask a question just to be sure we get to this part, which is, what skills do you find yourselves using most in what you're doing? What is really the most important parts that you draw from your educational background, and then that you've gained on the job, that you've gained through the course of your work outside of the classroom? Can you share about those things? Either of you can go first.
Sure. Go ahead.
So I would say that while I was in school, I really felt like all the theory that I was learning as part of SED, or I'm sure even society and environment, I'm sure there's a lot of theory involved there. I felt like, it wasn't really connecting to real world concepts that I'd be facing at work. But what I found is climate change especially is such a new field that it's really helpful to have those theories and that kind of foundational knowledge base to draw from, because there's a lot of topics you might just be told, go out and do some research on this. We're not exactly sure how we're going to be tackling it. And it's really helpful in that case to have somewhere to draw from. So in terms of what skills have been useful, I would say, definitely the research skills that we use a lot at Berkeley, but also just the kind of wealth of knowledge that you're exposed to. And, you never know what types of things might end up being important to your work in the future, because sustainability touches so many different topics. And in terms of hard skills, I know that's definitely something I was concerned about not getting enough of. But I would say in my role, I use a lot of data analysis. So definitely learning Python and taking Data 8 was pretty helpful for me, even if I wasn't going to become a programmer or use anything beyond sort of a foundational level. I know it was helpful for me in getting a job, certainly to just have that on my resume. But I do a lot of work in Excel for sure, but that is something you can totally learn on the job.
Yeah, so for me, when I was starting work after college, I really loved knowing things like facts or like hard information that gave me a comfort level with what I was doing. I didn't know very many of them, right? But I felt like in that moment, I felt really good that I had learned something extremely concrete and specific that would then help me do a good job. But realistically, what actually was the most helpful thing was just learning how to learn things. And that is what over time just really made me successful. And part of that is the research side that Ankitha talked about, but part of that is just being really comfortable with absorbing something new. Oh, you don't know what it is, you can go figure it out. And then you do know, and then you do have the answer. And wow, you guys can tell I don't usually sit at this desk at 6:42 because I had no idea the sun was going to come in my face like this. I'm usually on Zoom earlier in the day. But then I also would say over time, the other piece that has been incredibly valuable is the communication side, is the writing skills, and to some extent also the speaking skills. And in my case, because I was in design studios, I had to stand up in front of people and talk about my work. And that is very specific to architecture to some extent, but it also is directly transferable to nearly every other type of job. There really isn't a job out there. There's, probably a few, but not the kind that you guys are likely to do, where you don't need to know how to communicate your ideas. And being able to put, string two sentences together is just way more valuable than you could possibly imagine. And now that I do hiring for, for all different levels of staff, I always ask for a writing sample, because even if writing isn't a regular part of the day-to-day work, if people can't string two sentences together, then they're not going to be an effective member of my team. And that's going to be a problem over the long term. So it's not like the most fun or glamorous thing, but I would say not to neglect that stuff.
Thank you. When you, NACE, the National Association of Colleges and Employers, is an organization that surveys employers every year, and communication comes up very high on that. So it's definitely an important skill to cultivate, regardless of whatever career you're in. It's important. Does anybody, so let me ask, are there any other questions that any of you guys have, giving you a chance to ask another question if you'd like? And you can put it in the chat if you prefer. Oh, Daisy, go ahead.
Sorry, I have another question. Is there anything you wish you had known like before graduating? Yeah, in general, just like before applying or yeah, going into the field?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there were a lot of things, but the one that really struck me is that when I was in school, I had people telling me what, you know, the world was like and what I needed to learn to be successful in my job, and what I, you know, how I needed to think, and how I, you know, what I should be like, when the reality was I could, you know, I definitely did. And we heard this already. I definitely did kind of feel around a little bit to see what I really did like and what I did enjoy doing the most. And I could figure that out for myself in kind of at work. And once I was able to better understand, oh yeah, so maybe I'm not actually going to be like the capital D designer drawing all the beautiful pictures, which I'm totally not, by the way. I wish, like, wouldn't that be great? But I had other skills more on the technical side related to sustainability. And I didn't know that. And I had thought, you know, I was given a very straight message, like, you know, this is what a job in architecture looks like. And this is what the rest of your life is going to look like. And that was, you know, that couldn't have been farther from the truth. And I was totally able to find my path. It took a little longer than I might have liked. And I poked around doing some things I didn't always love, but there's some experimentation and trying things out and talking to people. Really, I think that more than trying things out, talking to people, doing different kinds of things. I really wish that I had been given some better guidance on what that looks like.
Thank you.
And did we lose Ankitha?
Oh. Huh. Where did she go?
I'm sure she has brilliant answers.
Yeah. Let me see. I don't know. Maybe, you know, her internet connection may have been a little bit not strong, or, you know, not, let's see. Well, we will hope that she comes back. And in the meantime, does anybody else have a question, or I will ask one? Are there any trends that you're seeing in the field, Mara, since, you know, from when you started to where you are now, that you think people should know about?
Well, I mean, there's been a huge amount of change in the type of work that I do, but I think that the one that is probably the most relevant, or maybe a couple of things, one being today, any field you go into can potentially be a sustainability field, dependent, with maybe some exceptions, but depending on what you do with it and what kind of focus you have within that. Because, you know, we're all here because we have an interest in sustainability, but sometimes, you know, the kinds of things that, you know, you might like to do might not have that title in the job, for example, but it's what you do with it. And then the second is, this will come as no surprise, right? But right now, the next 10 years, climate. And there's, it isn't to say that other aspects, like, say, water, little things like that here in California aren't important. But the tone has really shifted in the last even just 5 years to be, you know, much more awakened to that end. And also not just climate change, not just, you know, carbon emissions and climate resilience, but also adaptation. How are we changing the way we think about the world to be better adapted to a future that is totally unknown, but definitely different than what we have today?
Yes.
I feel like this is all super obvious, right? Like, you guys are in this space because you probably already know that. But it's folks outside of school are definitely a little slower to get with that program than you guys probably are.
I would think it's also helpful just to have it validated. Just
Yeah.
like, okay, yes.
And not everyone is, has this mindset, right? It still like boggles my mind completely that other people aren't necessarily there, but there's definitely a critical mass and we need more.
So Ankitha, I see you're back. Thank you, Mara. And the question that we had before, what was it? Daisy asked a question, right? It was, what would you have done differently? What do you wish you had known? That kind of a question, right, Daisy? Yeah. So Ankitha, do you have anything you'd like to say about anything you wish you'd done differently or that you learned along the way that would be important to share?
Things that I wish I had done differently. I think I would definitely tell my younger self not to worry as much about, what can you do with a degree relating to environmental or sustainability type things. I think that was definitely something I had some insecurity about was, a lot of my friends are doing like pre-med or engineering, like all these very defined career paths where you really know what you're doing and where you're going to end up. And sustainability is just so much more broad. It's hard to answer the question of, what you're going to do with this. But I think just knowing that this is a real career path where there are, lots of different types of jobs available. And definitely there's going to be some extra work in terms of figuring out where you want to fit into that and what really works for you in that space, but to not stress out about it.
I thought of another answer to the second question,
Sure.
but I think are we not on that yet?
Well, like trends, how things have changed. Yeah, I mean, I think, why don't you go ahead and then if Ankitha has something to add, she can add. But thank you, Ankitha, for that.
Changes from the last couple of years was the question. And I realized that I left out a big one and it just popped into my head. So sorry for that. But we've seen just an enormous amount of organizations reshifting focus around ESG, environmental, social, and governance. And so anyone who's coming through with an environmental focus who also wants to think a little bit more broadly about the social side, things like equity and inclusion, et cetera. And then the governance side, which is really how do you run an organization in a way that meets the environmental and social goals that you have? There's just an absolute burgeoning fountain of job positions coming out that relate to ESG that are, for the most part, on the private side. So working for corporations or other organizations, not governments or institutions, although they probably have some of those too. And it just, I had my eyes on sustainability positions for a long time as I was thinking of making a change. And there was just been a flood of that type of work. Part of it is driven by some federal government requirements for the stock exchange. I don't know much about that, but that's what I've heard. But that's a big trend as well.
Thanks.
Yeah, in terms of trends, I would definitely echo that. Equity has been a huge part of my work, and it's something that people really don't know a lot about. So it's something you can have a lot of flexibility with. It can definitely be daunting at times in terms of, how to apply kind of theory to practice in that space, especially because, it has such real world consequences. And I would also say in terms of broader sustainability, I know that resilience is becoming a huge thing. I think it's something that's been talked about for, a long time. Now there's some state, local, national legislation coming out about that. That's kind of driving more companies to think about it proactively.
thank you both for bringing up the whole equity arena, because obviously it is a huge space and there's so much to be done there. And I know a lot of Cal students are really interested in working in that space and having an impact. So it's unfortunate and fortunate that it's a space that you can move into, right? Anybody else have a question? Blake, I had the impression that you might have had a question.
Oh yeah, I think Mara mentioned a while ago that like knowing very specifically what part of sustainability she'd like to work in like helped her move through her career or move up, and like I guess just kind of broadly with like building a specialized like a knowledge base around like a special part of sustainability like help in a career sense, and maybe kind of like pitching yourself as like, oh, I'm really interested in like, I don't know, hydrology or something more specific, or yeah, would that be helpful in a career sense, do you think?
I think it could be, and it can go both ways. Maybe to be a little bit more clear about my earlier answer, my specialized interest was sustainability broadly, which is very different from other architects. So in many ways, I'm more like you guys, as you're mostly, I think there was one person in architecture, it looked like. You guys are mostly not in architecture. In many ways, I'm more like you guys than my architecture peers, and having that specialization within the field, especially at a time when there weren't that many of us, was really helpful. But I think a lot of it had to do with my personal passion and kind of commitment, and the way I was able to bring people along with that's specifically what helped to move me forward. But in terms of, and there are definitely, being passionate and being focused in really specific ways, if you know that that's what you want to do, which is rare, but if you do, then yeah, if you that can help you identify a trajectory that may move you through more quickly. It can be challenging to be more of a generalist if that's the, if that's the goal. There's definitely pros and cons to both. And I'm sure you had to ask five people at my place in my career, you'd ask 5 of them that question, and they'd probably all give you different answers.
Do you have ideas, Mara or Ankitha, about how to figure out where you fit? I mean, because of it being such a broad arena.
Ankitha gave some really good examples earlier. I think that there's a lot of great opportunities in just exploring different organizations and individuals to identify, to learn about what what does their everyday look like? Not like what is the flashy presence on the website, but what are they actually sitting and doing with their time all day? And I asked questions of everyone I could get my hands on to figure out what that meant. And didn't actually get a lot of answers until I was really, figuring it out within my job. But it's a lot of research. It's a lot of knowing yourself, but it's also a lot of trying different things to see what you might, what you feel like fits the best. And knowing where you're good, like what you're strong in. Like I knew I wasn't going to be that designer. Took me a little while to figure that out, but eventually I figured that out, and figured out where I was strong and where I could do well, and what would also make me happy. There's no silver bullet answer on that one, though.
Yeah, well, I think you've made some good points about knowing your strengths, knowing what you care about, knowing your passions to the extent that you can. I mean, I think that exploration and looking inward, it's sort of outward, inward, that combination can help you figure that out. Noticing what draws your attention, what you're curious about. And yeah, and the whole thing also, what you're saying about what's it like in this arena? I mean, so what we're doing right now is we're doing sort of a dual informational interview right here, right now. We're asking you about your experience. And so some of it is through getting experience, but many times people will apply, oh, I should apply for jobs, or I should apply for internships to get experience so I know, but there's a lot that you can do before you actually apply for anything. So I'm a big proponent of talking to people about what they do. And so let me ask, if you were to talk about your day-to-day, what it's like, so that everybody here can have an idea of, what would it be like if I followed in Mara's footsteps to the extent that that's possible, or if I were to pursue something like that. Can you give us an idea of what your day-to-day is like?
Sure. I do maybe three, there's like three different parts to what my day might look like. One relates to active projects, planning or architecture projects that I'm working on and working with the design teams to help make the project more sustainable, healthy, resilient, etc. So that's one thing that might look like meetings. It might be research into strategies. It might be focused collaboration sessions with team members to try to move ideas forward, presenting ideas to clients. And then the second part is trying to bring new work in. So in my case, a lot of what I'm doing is marketing and business development, which is not, that's something that has been more a part of my world recently, and not so much when I first started. A little bit, but not a lot. Interviewing to get new design projects in for the team to work on. And then the third part is management. Like, I work for a company that needs some level of management, managing staff, managing the finances, and making sure we get paid, invoicing clients like that. That's not a huge part of what I do, but it's definitely an important part in the sense that like we have to all get paid at the end of the day. That's really the kind of how it's probably half, in my case, it's half project work, and then 30% marketing and business development work and 20% of the management side.
Thank you. I think it's helpful to have those breakdowns to have a sense of it. Ankitha, you talked about your skills, the skills that have been important for you. Did you want to say something about sort of your typical day, what it's like?
Sure. Yeah. So I know people have often said this, but there definitely is no kind of typical day. I could be working on, any number of different combinations of projects, but usually I'm doing some amount of time in terms of just meetings, setting up new projects, giving progress on existing projects. Sometimes it's in terms of getting feedback from management, or sometimes it's just discussions with my coworkers on how we're going to be moving different things forward. And another time I always try to have in the day is just to actually double down and work on whatever things are ongoing. Usually that might be in terms of creating a presentation, pulling together some research. Sometimes it's just doing calculations in Excel or in a coding language. So that's definitely a huge part of my work. And I think otherwise, I do a little bit of professional development activities, trying to get to know people in my firm and continuing to do some informational interviews or any sort of educational certifications that I can, but definitely as the work gets busier, I do much less of that.
Thank you. Does anybody else have a question? I know we've hit a little after 7, but I want to give us the full time. If you guys are okay, I didn't even ask you permission. Is it okay if we stay a little longer? Is that okay with you, Mara and Ankitha, or do you need to get to other things?
I a bit longer.
I have a couple minutes. I've got a kid banging on the door wanting dinner, so I do have some limits.
I hear you.
Yeah,
sorry about that. Yeah.
Sorry.
No. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your life to do this. Does anybody else have any burning questions? What I would like to ask is if there's anything that you especially like or dislike about the work that you've had to do that would be helpful for people to know about. Well,
in my case, I would say that every type of job I've had, there's always been a certain level of what I would call grunt work that isn't really the fun stuff, but you just kind of got to do it. And that to some extent, that's almost inevitable. I mean, you might be, or maybe you're just someone who loves that kind of thing. But that there's always going to be tasks that aren't your favorite part of the job, but are part of the job nonetheless, and that you've got to kind of take the good with the bad. And so in my case, the grunt work, this is going to be different for you guys, but in my case, the grunt work was the time that the architect in charge of my project decided to put me through the ringer and make me do all of the door hardware details and schedules, which is like every door has hinges and doorknobs and closers and stops and like all sorts of other, it's just something that I never want to touch again and hopefully never will. But that was, you know, it's part of the package. And that, you know, gives me the opportunity to do the other stuff that I really do love. And I think the important thing is to make sure that you don't end up getting stuck doing door hardware schedules for years on end. And that if you are in that place where you do get stuck doing, metaphorically speaking, that the door hardware schedules, that you're able to, if you're not able to get yourself out of that in your current position, you need to get a new job. But then hopefully that will balance out with the things that are the fun stuff.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I agree with Mara about the kind of grunt work that you end up doing, especially when you're kind of just starting. There's, in my job at least, there's, you know, some aspect of just computational work where you're, you know, you might just be pulling data, you might just be manipulating things in Excel, and, you know, it doesn't take like a whole bunch of brain power to do some of those tasks. You know, one aspect of my job that I do is I do some of our price forecasts for electricity, gas, greenhouse gas emissions, and that is a lot of coding in SAS, which is a programming language, and that is not something I have a lot of experience in, and so it's definitely one of the pieces of grunt work that I don't love about my job, but it's definitely given me the opportunity to pick up some new skills, and I know that it's something that could definitely be useful in understanding just how my whole sector works. So definitely taking the good with the bad, but you know, if you have a chance to talk to your manager about it, you could say, you know, the things that you enjoy the most and try to get more projects in terms of that.
Great. Thank you. So Mara, I don't want to keep you any longer. I'd like to thank you both so much for taking the time to speak with us.